Hello, it's me again, and I'm doing another video. This time, my plan here is to talk about Mars retrograde in Gemini. But before I really get into the Mars Gemini stuff, there's certain things I'd like to address, namely the fact that it's Christmas time, and I feel a certain degree of guilt, perhaps, about the fact that I'm not the most Christmassy person in the world. I do have a Sagittarius stellium natally, but well, yeah. Without getting into my whole chart and everything, I am not. I've met a lot of other Sagittariuses that have this genuine love for Christmas, but it's always been something that I've struggled with. Not even like there's different. Some people might be, because of family stuff that's happened or stuff. Like for me, it's even before the stuff happened, I didn't like Christmas very much. You know what I mean? It was like whether it's before or after different events that are troublesome happen. It doesn't like I never really liked. I mean, there's things I like about Christmas, but I have a certain struggle with it anyways, I guess you could say. And I do notice though that there's a lot of people who take an attitude towards Christmas which may be they don't really go for the religious stuff so much, but the thing about like being warm and friendly and sharing gifts and presents and holiday cheer and all this kind of stuff, like it kind of puts an more emphasis on that than the religious stuff. But in my own life, it's not to say that, I mean, I don't want to come off as being like saying like I've been totally deprived and depraved and I haven't had any good Christmas experiences in my life or anything like that. Like, I mean, that would just be being disingenuous and not be, being not seeing the good things that have happened in my life. And there's things that I am grateful for, right? So I don't want to be such a downer, basically, right? But the other side of it too is that, especially, I mean, it's COVID and all this kind of stuff, and I mean, I guess people aren't really isolating as much anymore, but I have this thing, I don't know, I don't want to get into all my personal life is what I'm trying to, part of it. And I don't want to make it like I'm trying to avoid, like this whole thing is just a game of me avoiding my own personal problems, but at the same time, anything that I would put together and put on the internet is something that becomes digitized into information, which is like your psychological profiles getting built on the internet, and you're like submitting yourself to become a kind of like a slave to this I mean, it's the I'm going with YouTube, Google, right? It's like, it's one of these things that if I really didn't want to, maybe I just would not do it, which is, I took a break from it for 6 months and I was debating, should I do it at all? Should I delete my YouTube channel, delete my Facebook, just scrub it off, just like abandon the social media thing, like, and like take spirituality or whatever in a direction that is not like public, not online, not about gaining followers and all this kind of stuff. And I don't know, I mean, whatever. I'm there, but so there's all this kind of stuff going on that I'm trying to work out right now, because I don't really, there's a problem I have with the internet, with putting myself out there, and there's certain, whether to make my personal life and all this kind of thing public, and whether to go into all this kind of stuff, and that's something I'm dealing with. But yeah, I don't want to get bogged down on that right now. I want to talk about Mars and Gemini. And there's something about the Mars and Gemini thing to me which relates to this, though, because if you look at the archetype of Gemini, it's the twins, right? And you can see the dynamic of the twins show up in things like, either siblings or like best friends, or even like groups of friends, or like, the kind of like, I think of like, the kids on the playground and stuff like this, right? And of course, Mars is a malefic, right? So Mars introduces a bit of friction, it introduces a bit of tension, it introduces a bit of conflict and stuff like this. And, before I started making these videos, before I decided to come back and start making these videos, I was still kind of having conversations with some friends about astrology, and a friend was saying something like that she she wasn't viewing the Mars retrograde in a negative light, and in the conversations I was having with this friend, I was kind of like, but, I started to question that maybe there's certain things, like if you take malefic planets and you can see if they're making challenging aspects, and that it's if you just take a plain kind of Hellenistic look at it, being all like, oh yeah, that doesn't look like a very nice transit coming up, right? But like the idea that even there's maybe things that are more difficult transits that you could like work with productively and get something out of them, right? But I mean, this is for me. I don't as a guy who has like a stacked Sagittarius stellium, and I've got Mars in Gemini hanging out for 6 months, and just like that. Like I'll tell you, I was doing, I'll tell you this much, that to just, rather than project my own thing onto it, and to sort of have a preconceived notion of how to interpret it, I decided to do a tarot reading where I would just pull one card to give me a, something about like, this Mars and Gemini, and what kind of, what it signified, for me or whatever. And the card I just got was just an Ace of Wands, and I used reversal, so it was an upright Ace of Wands, and that's just kind of like, I mean, there could be a bit of the, that potency, a little bit of like that fiery wand. What can I say? It's a bit phallic, the wand. I don't have to get into all that though, right? But there's that side of it. But there's something about it too that just, it's kind of like, it didn't, to me, like a Mars retrograde and you got an Ace of Wands. It's like something you might do something with that, right? It's not like it's not like, your whole world crashing down. It's like, what can we do with a Mars retrograde, right? And so for me, I look at it as this kind of thing of like, okay, the thing, yeah, like the lovers in tarot, the friend, with the whole archetype of the friends and the siblings and all those kinds of things going on, and in like, I don't want to get too much into my personal life, but I have to say that maybe I should just do it. Well, I'm gonna take a risk, okay? And like, because there's things that sort of bother me about Christmas, and that it's like right now what it reminds me of is like, with all the snow and everything like that, is that when I was growing up and I was a little kid, I had like neighbors that I remember, there's something, I kind of had this realization that it was like, there's all sorts of friends that have come and gone in my life, right? So I don't mean to, I don't know, there's this thing that goes on. And it also relates to Mars and Gemini. Maybe I'm going to steer away from this friend stuff, not go there, and talk about this thing for a second. If you think about Gemini and mutability, right? It's multifaceted. It stands for a diverse range of different things. And if you think about Mars has to do with cutting, separating. And often when you put Mars and Mercury together, you get something that can be very technical, and like technical precision, right? Like being very like precise with what you're doing, and especially with that using language or techniques or things like this, right? So if you look at it like that, I made this video when I was trying to get over my own aversion to like, oh my God, do I want to make these videos or not? And they do this YouTube thing and try to be popular. So I was for whatever. I'm just gonna like complain about it. I'm sorry, but I have to complain about capitalism before I do any serious astrology, just to get it off my chest a little bit, right? But I mean, what are you doing complaining about capitalism? It's like, my technique though here is to basically use a technique of framing, which is to use the Mars and Gemini thing about thinking about the intellectual ideal kind of thing of it, and taking like a scalpel and being like, there's all this stuff that people associate with capitalism, like consumer commodities and different stuff that goes with it. And the idea to take a scalpel and basically just cut something out, like carve it out. And the thing I'm carving out is debt. Basically, the idea of crediting, lending, capital interest, investments, also speculative markets, basically like gambling on the stock market and all this kind of stuff, right? But basically, there's all this other stuff. People talk about your iPhones, your cars, your all this and that, just carving out this one thing to present to you, and say this is what this one thing. No, it's not even to say that we need to kill it or get rid of it. I'm just saying if you take this one thing and make that your god, you're not like, well, I don't know, like, what are you doing, right? Like, it's like the golden calf thing. It's like the Wall Street bull and making that your god, right? And it's like, if that's what you want to do, basically, if that's what you want to do, just know that you're doing that, basically, right? And understand what you're doing and contemplate it spiritually and decide whether that is the path you want to take or not. And then what I can do is to see that there's a different side of it that I'm going to take, basically, right? So that was basically the strategy with the that video. But there's certain things that I wanted to, I don't want to give people the wrong impression at the same time, because the part of this whole thing about the twins, right? The multiplicity, right? The plurality, the different points of view, is that by making a statement like that, the whole act of doing that, of taking one thing and then separating it from everything else going on and presenting an ideological statement about it, means that you're framing out a lot of stuff, and that what you do with this one thing has repercussions to all that other shit. And it's not. I did this thing where I was talking about. I made a reference to carbon taxes, right? And it was kind of a bratty thing to do, I have to admit, because I know that there's a tension, that there's these people that are really, in Canada, it's I did a bit of more research and found out that it came from the Yellow Vest movement in France. And I'll just talk about that right now, is that there's some sort of thing where I personally have always identified as being more of an environmentalist, and I just kind of looked at the situation on Earth, and in terms of there's certain motivations. I've never actually owned a car before, and there's different factors into why I've never owned a car, but I have to admit that one of those factors was growing up basically with this impression that I was heading into the apocalypse like Mad Max, and if there's anything I can do not to create that reality, then I've got a responsibility to do that, basically, right? So and that kind of informs a lot of, informed my decisions as a young man, and I've kind of ended up kind of weird as this guy who doesn't drive and is into funny new age stuff. I don't know. This is it's kind of how it's ended up. Okay, what can I say? But so, and I mean, but being this kind of person, that's my how I've ended up my life. If you look at what's going on, the Yellow Vest thing came from, which was a carbon tax against people in France. It was specifically targeted at diesel, which was being used by lower class people. And it was kind of created this situation where the lower classes were taking the brunt of the basic, paying off the deficit. Who's put foot in the bill for it? It's the poor people, right? And there's there's a sign in these protests. Some of these guys had signs that said you're worried about the end of the world, I'm worried about the end of the month, right? And I'm by using Mars and Gemini, one of the things that I'm doing is that by doing this move where you're framing things out, where I'm framing out capitalism specifically as this one thing that is about debt and this kind of stuff, and I'm against it, and it affects all this other stuff, and then there's all these other people whose lives, whether or not the interest rates go up and down or not, that could make a lot of difference to some people. That could and I'm actually entirely privileged if I can create a kind of a bubble for myself where the economy can just be fucked and I don't give a shit. I mean, to be honest, is I've actually I have a bit, I got enough money to buy a fancy sports car and drive it off a cliff, basically. which I'm not going to do, but that's basically what my economic, I mean, it wouldn't even be that fancy of a sports car. It would be like kind of a mid-range sports car, and I'd just, crash into a brick wall, and that would be my, if I wanted to use up my my economic potential. In the grand scheme of things, I don't have that much economic power, right? Maybe I should be saying this on the internet, how much money I've got. It's, but like the economy sucks right now, basically. And I can understand if people are frustrated with the economy, frustrated with their position in life, want to make money, all this kind of stuff. And what I also want to say too is that there's this whole thing about like the whole neoliberal thing about enabling people, basically, and giving people services and stuff like that to enhance their ability to compete in a kind of competitive entrepreneurial marketplace kind of thing. I mean, if some I don't know, like maybe it doesn't make sense for me to take such a staunch position against that specific kind of thing. And basically with this whole Mars and Gemini thing, I would like to acknowledge that and try to say that what I'm doing is kind of inspired by a woman I found out about, because I was taking astrology classes from Adam Elenbaas, and at the end of it, he was kind of saying that, like, a lot of people out there might do astrology videos the way that he does, but it's just one way to do an astrology video, right? And that when the people he referenced was this female astrologer, Caroline Casey, who I'd never heard of before. And so I looked at her. I think there's a few longer things of hers online, but I've only found like a few things from Caroline Casey. But one of the Caroline Casey ideas is about the coyote and the Gemini. I feel like Gemini and Mercury is great for that coyote trickster kind of thing, right? And one of the things that she was saying about the coyote Gemini trickster is that, I'm making the association with Gemini, and it works though, right? There's something about like the two-sidedness and having that, especially with Mars, is that like Mars can be malefic, right? Mars can be like a fight, but like if you look at animals play fight with each other, right? And these courses that I took up was taking recently, the play came into it, and one of the things, they were talking about how, what was the line? It was this great line about how animals haven't waited for man to teach them to play. They're not going to wait. Like the whole thing about this evolution thing, right? Like the thing about play that's really fundamental to the to like humans play, animals play, like Alan Watts stuff. They say the universe itself is just playing, right? And so the whole thing about about, I was getting the image anyways, with all this snow around, of just like a snowball fight. Because there's something about a snowball fight which is playful, and it's fun, and it's sort of like, it engages the community, engages the group. And so I'm basic, like, the kind of thing of like how to work, to be honest, I have to admit, I don't have to, this Byung Chul Han stuff, Byung Chul Han has this idea that it's like, you don't have to be, to put your authentic self on the internet, and you can just kind of be polite and say Merry Christmas and stuff. But I'm having a bit of trouble getting there, to be honest. Like, I have to, there's something that I have to express, rather than just being polite and saying Merry Christmas and pretending my life is all happy and I'm not bitter and everything's great, and like there's a certain kind of bitterness that I do have, and that it's one of these things that there's a fine line in the snowball fight where you could be playing around, but then there's also an actual kind of level of maliciousness that can come in, right? And that's like the kind of the Mars thing that I should probably have to be careful, because I don't want to go around being malicious. But what Caroline Casey has this, what she says, like, as animals play fight, there's this thing that's like woof woof, let's play, right? And so I would like my message for Mars and Gemini is a kind of a woof woof, let's play kind of thing, and that if but what I got to work with, like when you got to there's one of my inspirations also is Leonard Cohen, and there's this great line I was watching. I think it's from the documentary about him becoming a Zen Buddhist, maybe. But there's this line that always comes up for me where he's saying that people talk about what a great writer he is, or how he's written these amazing songs, and he's like, yeah, the thing about writing is that, like, it's not like you're walking up to a buffet table and you've got, you know what I mean? Like, you've got, like, I'm just going to compose, I've got there's something wonderful about creativity, though, that I find music, to me, feels a bit more like that, where I have a wide range of options just to do, but eventually it kind of just comes out like what you're going to express is what you're going to express, because that's what you got to work with, basically, right? And if I'm going to make astrology videos, and if I'm going to, like, the person I am, the way my life has been, like, I have to admit there's a certain, maybe I'm a bit cold and bitter, but, like, maybe those, like, maybe they can be like snowballs, right? Or, like, the idea, I don't mean to go around, like, I don't want to be like doom and gloom and bumming people out, but to, like, playfully chuck some snowball, and, like, to go, like, just try to, then I think that's part of the spirit of Christmas in a way, because it's kind of like people being all grinchy and, like, closed up and stuff, like, and you got to have the kids come by and, like, like, jangle your door and, and kind of to liven things up a little bit, because if I don't do that, that's kind of that's what my life kind of feels like. It can feel pretty depressing. So, I'm trying to say too that there's something about, like, I don't know. I was involved in all this whatever mental health stuff for a while, and I don't know if I want to get into all that in my astrology channel, but, like, there's something about it, like, a guy I know on the internet who's in the Jungian scene was talking about, like, melting the wall of ice, kind of. That was kind of like the metaphor he was using in his post I read a couple a while back. But there's something about, like, you gotta be careful melting the wall of ice that you don't burn yourself out and just not end up melting any ice. You know what I mean? And that's something I'm trying to be a bit cautious of, anyways. But okay, I think I managed to express the idea I had. Anyways, there's other things about Mars and Gemini that I could say, though. But I've got the basic idea I wanted to present there, so I'll leave it there for now.